I didn't plan on staying long. This was supposed to be temporary, a new job, a new apartment, a new city where no one knew who I used to be. I repeated it to myself every morning like a mantra. Temporary meant safe. No emotions. No attachments. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Sometimes silence is louder than words. I unpacked slowly, as if stretching time, because I knew that sooner or later I'd have to leave the room and face reality. We ran into each other by accident. In a narrow hallway where there isn't enough space for two people to apologize properly. I looked up, and immediately knew this was a mistake. Some looks don't pass by unnoticed. They leave marks. He stepped back first. I didn't. And that was the beginning of something I never wanted. I noticed him before I learned his name. Some people don't try to stand out, they just do. He moved slowly, like he was never in a rush, and somehow that pulled me in. When he stayed silent, the space between us filled with tension. "Don't complicate it," he said during our second conversation. I smiled, because I didn't yet understand what he meant. Later, he explained. Clearly. Without emotion. No questions. No past. No promises. I should have walked away right then. Pretended I didn't care. But instead, I nodded. Maybe because I was tired of being the good one. Or because there was something broken in his voice that felt far too familiar. I told myself it was just an arrangement. And once again, I lied. I learned his rules before I learned his habits. He never stayed the night. Never talked about himself more than necessary. And never looked me in the eyes for longer than a few seconds. It should have scared me. Instead, I felt strangely calm. As if we both knew this wasn't forever, and that made it safer. The problems started when I began to wait. Not for messages, for silence. Not for meetings, for the moments after them. I caught myself wanting to know who he was before me. And who he might become if he allowed himself. One day, I asked. Just one simple question. He turned away. "Don't," he said quietly. And in that moment, I understood, his past wasn't just a story. It was a wound that still bled. I tried to convince myself I could handle it. That I was stronger now. Smarter. More careful with my heart. I'd been through worse, after all. Or at least that's what I told myself late at night when the apartment felt too empty again. He showed up when he wanted to. Always calm. Always controlled. And every time, I told myself not to read into the way his hand lingered for half a second too long. Or how his voice softened when he said my name. I memorized the version of him he allowed me to see. And ignored the one he kept hidden. Once, while we were sitting in silence, I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. I felt him tense beside me, like closeness was something he had to fight against. For a moment, I thought he might pull away. Instead, he stayed. That small decision did more damage than he could ever know. I started noticing the cracks. They appeared in the quiet moments, when he thought I wasn't watching. The way his jaw tightened when certain words came up. The way his gaze drifted somewhere far away, as if he was trapped in a place I couldn't follow. I wanted to ask what haunted him. I wanted to matter enough to be trusted. But I remembered the rules. No questions. No past. So I swallowed my curiosity and replaced it with patience. I told myself that if I didn't push, he might stay. That if I accepted less, I wouldn't lose everything. That was the first time I realized how dangerous hope can be. Because hope doesn't announce itself. It settles quietly. And then it refuses to leave. The night everything shifted was painfully ordinary. No arguments. No raised voices. Just rain against the windows and the familiar silence between us. He stood by the door, already halfway gone, like he always was. "Stay," I said before I could stop myself. The word hung between us, heavy and exposed. For a second, he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something close to fear. "I can't," he replied. That should have been enough. But instead of stepping back, I took a step closer. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't asking for promises. Just honesty. His expression hardened. "You don't want what I come with," he said. And that was the moment I realized. Whatever he was running from, he was terrified I might follow. I told myself to stop expecting more. Expectations were dangerous. They turned moments into disappointments and silence into questions I wasn't allowed to ask. So I learned to pretend I didn't notice when he pulled away emotionally right after pulling me close. But pretending takes energy. And I was running out. One evening, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself. I looked softer. More careful. Like someone who had started measuring every word before saying it. That scared me more than his distance ever could. When I walked back into the room, he was watching me. Not the way he usually did, guarded and distant, but openly, like he was memorizing something he planned to forget. "Are you okay?" he asked. The question felt wrong. Too intimate. I nodded anyway. Because telling the truth would have meant admitting that I was already falling for someone who refused to catch me. The first time he said my name like it mattered, it caught me off guard. We weren't close. Not touching. Just standing in the kitchen, the light low, the air heavy with unsaid things. He said it quietly. Almost carefully. For a moment, I thought this was it. The crack. The opening I'd been waiting for. I felt my chest tighten with hope before I could stop it. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down. Something changed in his face, not panic, but resolve. Like a door slamming shut from the inside. He put the phone away without answering and stepped back, rebuilding the distance between us. "I should go," he said. I watched him leave and felt something settle deep inside me. A certainty I didn't want. I wasn't just an escape for him. I was a reminder of everything he was afraid to feel again. I tried dating someone else. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed proof that I still could. That my world hadn't shrunk to the space he occupied and controlled without even trying. The man was kind. Attentive. He asked questions and waited for answers. He looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. And all I could think about was how wrong it felt. When he reached for my hand, I felt nothing. When he smiled, I felt guilt. Because the person I wanted wasn't there, and even if he was, he wouldn't have reached back. That night, I went home alone and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. I didn't cry. I just stared at the wall and accepted the truth I'd been avoiding. I was already in love with someone who had never promised me anything. And somehow, that hurt the most. I stopped pretending after that. Not with him, with myself. I stopped acting like this was harmless, like I could walk away whenever I chose. The truth was quieter and more dangerous. I didn't want to walk away anymore. He noticed the shift. He always noticed, even when he pretended not to. "You're pulling back," he said one night, his voice flat but his eyes searching. I wanted to laugh at the irony. At how unfair it felt that he could sense distance when he was the one who built it brick by brick. Instead, I shrugged. Maybe I'm just learning, I replied. That was the first time I saw regret cross his face. Real regret. Not fear. Not control. Something closer to loss. For a moment, I wondered if he felt it too, the slow realization that whatever this was, it was slipping out of our hands. The truth came out by accident. It always does. I wasn't supposed to see the photo. It flashed briefly on his phone when he wasn't paying attention, a woman's face, frozen in a moment of happiness that felt painfully out of place. My chest tightened before my mind caught up. He saw my reaction immediately. "Don't," he said, reaching for the phone. But it was too late. "She's gone," he admitted after a long silence. "Because of me." The words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded worn. Like he'd been carrying them alone for too long. He didn't give details. He didn't need to. The weight of the guilt was enough. I finally understood. Loving me wasn't what scared him. Hurting me the way he'd hurt her was. I thought knowing would make things easier. It didn't. If anything, it made everything heavier. Because now I could see the shape of his pain, and it mirrored my own in ways I wasn't prepared for. We were two people afraid of different things, him of repeating the past, me of becoming it. "You don't have to protect me," I said softly. He looked at me like I'd asked him to forget who he was. "I do," he replied. "That's the problem." That was when I realized the cruel truth: love doesn't always ask if you're ready. And healing doesn't happen just because someone deserves it. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them go, even when every part of you wants them to stay. And sometimes, love means choosing the pain you can live with. We didn't speak for days after that. Not because we were angry, because we were careful. Careful with words. With silence. With the fragile understanding that had settled between us like thin ice. I told myself this was the end. That some stories don't need closure to be complete. They just stop hurting loudly and start hurting quietly instead. Then he showed up. No excuses. No defenses. Just him, standing in my doorway, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. Like someone who had finally lost a fight he'd been winning for years. "I don't know how to love without destroying it," he said. "But I know I don't want to run anymore." That wasn't a promise. It wasn't a solution. But it was the first honest thing he'd ever given me. I didn't forgive him. Not fully. Healing doesn't work that way. Trust doesn't snap back into place just because the truth finally shows up. What I did was listen. He talked about the guilt. About the night that changed everything. About how loving someone once had convinced him that love always ends in loss. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. When he finished, the silence felt different. Not empty, open. "I'm scared," I admitted. "But I'm more scared of never trying." He nodded slowly, like he understood that fear better than anyone. We didn't reach for each other right away. We just sat there, side by side, learning how to exist in the same space without running. That felt like a beginning. Love didn't fix us. It didn't erase the past or quiet every fear. What it did was give us a choice, to stay present, even when it was uncomfortable. To speak, even when silence felt safer. Some days were harder than others. Some days, his walls went back up. Some days, my doubts were louder than my hope. But we stayed. Not because it was easy. Because it was honest. I stopped calling it temporary. He stopped treating love like a threat. We learned that pain doesn't disappear just because you face it, but it loses its power when you stop facing it alone. This wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't meant to be. It was two broken people choosing, every day, not to turn their wounds into weapons. And somehow, that was enough.